John, it's wonderful to meet you, sir. Thank you for taking a minute out today.
It's great to be here, Joe. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So, where are you located on the planet?
On the planet, I'm located in Western Massachusetts in the beautiful Berkshire Hills,
Okay.
so almost into New York. I can look out the back window and see New York State from here.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm in the middle of the country in Kansas City, so it's great to connect with you.
Yeah,
Looking
another
for,
big jazz town.
yeah, oh, yeah, are you kidding?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
before we got on, we talked a little bit about your history in jazz. So I want to get into that. I want to get into all of the good work that you're doing with writing and everything that's going on in your world. But to begin with, this pandemic was such a big deal. Surviving it,
Right.
there were so many unknowns. It's the 5 year anniversary, so to speak. How much of living through that time period has affected the way that you approach and live life today?
It actually was one of the seminal, even at this age, was one of the seminal periods of time for me. It gave me, I literally was finishing up a position as what's called an interim pastor at a church, and I finished that assignment on March 1st when things were starting to bubble, and everything just closed down after that. I had a book in the works that I was working on. I had some recording that I was working on. So it gave me, for the first time in my life, free time. I'd never had free time before. So I kind of come at this with different eyes. For 2 years, I was able to, wake up in the morning and sit down at the computer and write, and then go into the studio. I have a little studio in the basement downstairs. There was no pressure to go out and do anything. Now, obviously, I'm well aware of the fact that people suffered a bunch through this, but it affected me in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So here in the modern 2025 day right now, if I was to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, sixth graders, career day, and one of the kids wanted to know what you did for a living, back of the room, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
I think I just try to be as creative as possible with whatever gifts I've been given. I think that that's what I would tell them. Whatever, if you have something that you feel passionate about, by all means, pursue that. We know that great line from Joseph Campbell, pursue or follow your bliss. I don't exactly. I think what you have to do is you have to get a job first, and then and keep your bliss kind of off to the side. Don't let the world destroy that bliss on you.
Yep.
And then at a certain point, you'll be able to return to that bliss. Very few people have the luxury of, say, going to school, high school, college, getting out and just having a glide path into that career, no matter what that career is, if it's in, especially in the arts, it's a tough haul. So you got to have, you got to be able to pay the rent, and so just don't find a job that's going to suck your soul.
Yeah,
Just find something that and keep that, whatever that creative spark is, keep it alive.
absolutely. Well said. So
Yeah.
when you were a kid, what'd you want to be when you grew up? What was your dream life?
I sort of had well, it is as many people my age, when the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan, there was I almost went to seminary. I came very close to going to seminary at that point. Once I saw the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, that was it was all over.
Yeah.
I mean, I already played. At that point, I'd already had a good deal of experience in music, even though I was, only 12 or so at that point. But I had been a singer and play piano, play guitar. And then it was just like, Katie bar the door. That was where I was going. And I did do that. I went to both BU and Berkeley, and studied jazz and rock, and played for quite a while. Yeah.
So take me back to your beginnings, where you were born and raised. What were these elements of creativity, of music, of this tenacity of going after your dream? How did these things get sewn into you? How did they become who you are?
A couple of ways. My father was one of the few people I know who absolutely just loved his job. He was a fire chief, ended up being the assistant commissioner of the fire department in Boston. I never saw anyone who who, went off to work and just was, happy to be going off to work. He never complained about work. That really had a big impression on me, the fact that you could go off and do something that you really enjoyed. So, and there was always it was a huge I suspect you might come from an Italian
Yeah,
Catholic
yeah,
background.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
okay. Well, we have very similar backgrounds. I come from an Irish Catholic background, so I, I'd be willing to bet we could go head to head on how many first cousins we have.
yeah.
I have 55 first cousins. It's a huge family. And it was always there were always stories. There was people in the kitchen, singing and having a great time. And I saw that as and telling stories. And I saw that as, kind of a way of life, just, that they, to make life into a story, that there was always going to be a song and a story attached to it. So that really had a profound effect on me.
So, what was the first live show you saw when you were a kid? Other than watching the Beatles on Sullivan, what was it that really hooked you with live music?
Well, I did have my first recording session was when I was 11 years old, was with the Boston Symphony, and I had the full symphony behind me,
Yeah,
as I was a soprano soloist, so there was that. And but even probably even more profound, for me, and this is going to be somebody who I'm not sure if everybody would recognize his name. I saw Todd Rundgren
yeah,
when I was about 16 years old. I sort of snuck into a place called the Tea Party in Boston, which was like the venue. And I saw this guy that could sing, could play, could write, and he's had a huge impact on me. I mean, the guy is just I consider him a genius. So when I first saw him, he was amazing. Yeah.
So you went to the Berklee College of Music, you pursued music. Give me kind of a snapshot of your kind of career trajectory up to today.
Well, that my career trajectory was, as you know, playing. I did play a lot of jazz, but jazz does not pay very well. And I was working as a full-time musician. I had a family, so I had to take a lot of gigs that I didn't want to have to do. I was working, doing weddings and which there seemed to be an inverse relationship between the amount of money you get paid and the qual and how much fun you had at the gig. That meaning that you didn't have the less fun you had, the more you get paid.
Yeah.
Um, but I worked in rock bands. I went on the road with Phoebe Snow, played in her band, which was kind of a crossover between rock and jazz. And then, unfortunately, I developed this. I had a very bad panic attack on stage, not an anxiety attack, but a sort of a crippling panic attack where I couldn't breathe. I mean, I fell to the floor. This is playing with a band, in a club, and that kind of morphed into a situation where I literally could not get back on stage. Somebody who loved being on stage, I could not get back on stage. So I had to eventually leave the music world and went into advertising for a bit, where I could sort of, just it was still a creative pursuit. I was a copywriter, so I could stare out the window a whole lot.
Yeah.
And then I was very fortunate that I ran into a psychiatrist who had this was back when nobody even really knew what this was.
Yeah.
And there finally was some medication for this, which enabled me to get back into the swing of things. And then I went into ministry, which had been a long dormant thing from back at that Beatles ministry crossroad.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So, there was a documentary that's on Robbie Williams. He's the big UK musician,
Right,
and
right,
he had a panic attack on stage.
right,
I guess he had done acid or something happened, and he just absolutely went through the whole performance or most of it, and no one knew. But in the afterglow, when they show the photos, you can see it happening. You can see the
right.
whole thing.
I will definitely have to check that out. Yeah, because people often confuse it with an anxiety attack. It's something totally different. It
Yeah,
really is. It's really debilitating.
yeah.
So.
So I'm curious, when you look at your life, these moments that can be seen as debilitating, can turn into strengths, can turn into a different path that's unexpected. Do you look back at that moment and think you're thankful to your creator that that moment happened to get you where you're at today?
Um, yes. Took me a while to get to that point. But yes, that was, I think that, I was probably 32, 33 years old when this happened, maybe a little bit younger. But as the music business, it can be a dangerous business. You're not out there with Boy Scouts. You're out there with, especially if you're, playing rock music and you're in clubs all the time and there's, drinking and drugs and all kinds of stuff around. That would have been definitely an unsustainable career. I was always in bands that were like right on the verge of making it. You're standing in the A&R guy's office. He's listening to the tape. He's smiling, and then he says, I got to pass, at the end. But you're all, and that's unfortunately, that becomes sort of like the dopamine hit that keeps you coming back for that. So um, at a certain point, I would have had to give that up anyway. And I think that I do look back on that now as creating a fork in the road that I was able to take the right path after that fork.
So I got a spiritual question for you. About 3 or 4 years ago, I was covering a show in Kansas City for St. Vincent, who's just enormously um, talented, and she had a great band around her.
Right, right.
So I'm there, and it's 2021, maybe 22 or 21, but it was at the point where masks were coming off. It was warm, outside venue. We're just like, wow, we get to see this again. So all of a sudden, I noticed a musician on stage. One of my favorite musicians of all time is a guitarist in LA named Jason Faulkner. He was a part of a band called Jellyfish, which is one of my
Uh-huh.
favorite, very Beatles-esque.
Oh, huh.
So I'm sitting there and I'm like, my wife looks at me and it's like I saw a ghost. And I'm like, is that Jason Faulkner? And then I go up and I get closer. And as I get closer, I see the brother of my best friend that we used to listen to Faulkner all the time. And I'm like, there's no way this is happening. It's Faulkner, it's his brother. And at that moment, I had
Yeah,
this spiritual, one of the handful of times in my life where I knew that there was the existence of a higher power of a God. There's no way that just happened randomly. So, my
yeah.
question to you is this: as a man of faith and spirituality, what was the moment where you knew that solidified you as a spiritual being?
There were probably several, and some of them happened. Music to me has always been the hot wire to the whatever word you want to put there, the divine, the one, because when you play music or when you experience music in the audience, you have a sense of transcendence. You move into a different place where you are at one with the audience, with again. I'm not going to put words in people's heads here for what that, who is responsible for that, but you can call it God, you can call it, Brahma, you can call it whatever you want. But yeah, those experiences. I had another one of those when I was standing on the Sea of Galilee, in Israel, just, thinking that, here's this place that everybody, when you hear the Sea of Galilee, you think of a sea. It's a tiny little place. It's like, a lake that's like 7 miles long.
Yeah.
But so much stuff happened there. If you go back to the biblical accounts, I just had this moment of thinking, the people that in the Gospels probably walked where I'm standing right now,
Uh-huh.
and that was a really powerful spiritual experience. Seeing my kids born.
Oh man, forget
You
it.
know, it's just, I mean, that just like lifts the top of your head off. I mean, there's like that experience, and then, then, the day-to-day experience, you never, so you have, if you're lucky, you might get, I don't know, what, six, eight of those in a
Right,
lifetime,
right.
but they're so powerful that they last. That's the thing about them. Those things really, really I remember being backstage, and going out. I was playing with Phoebe Snow. We were going out to play in Drury Lane Theatre in London, and Paul McCartney was in the audience. And I remember being backstage, and I think if somebody touched me, I would have floated away because it was like, not only am I here in the playing in this band, in a band that I love just I loved the music. Phoebe Snow was just an incredible singer. She was on every single night. I got to sing with her. I was her background singer and piano player. And McCartney's in the audience, and we're going to go out and play some of McCartney's songs every night, and Don't Let Me Down. And I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking
That's
about that right
crazy,
now.
dude. That's
Yeah,
crazy. The
yeah,
full circle divinity of that moment, of the birth of your real music soul, came from that man. And he's right there, and you get a beat. That's crazy.
yeah, 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 yeah. I unfortunately did not get a chance to meet him after the show. We were supposed to meet him after the show. I mean, I've seen him play several times, but did not get a chance to meet him. But just simply the fact that he was there was just, an amazing thing.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
You were talking about how the Sea of Galilee was so small. I remember seeing Dealey Plaza in Dallas. I
yeah,
was on a business trip. That's
right.
tiny. They make it look like it's
That's
football
right,
field after football field. And it's like,
right.
wait, there's a grassy knoll right there. I could throw a rock. I could throw a rock to the book depository. It's right there.
Right, I had same experience. I had a business trip to Dallas, and of course went over there. Was like, and that was another seminal event in my
Yes.
life. So you get out. I remember that day so vividly, and you get over there and you think, this is it.
Yeah.
This world-shattering event happened in this place that's so tiny.
Yeah.
It's just crazy,
You
crazy.
know,
Yeah,
it wasn't until in my 20s I would sit around with my dad on Sundays and we would talk. And he told me his JFK story, and I can't believe it took so long for him to tell me this, but he was born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island, and he was working for a trash company, and they were going around, and the pal that he was with that was doing it was this big black man, and he was a real affable, fun guy. And all of a sudden that day, he was on the curb, this real tough guy, holding it in. He's black
yeah,
in the 60s. He's crying. And my dad got totally spooked and went over and said, thought he might be playing with them. And he said, "What's the
yeah,
matter, man?" And he just looked up with tears coming out of his eyes and he said, "The only hope we had is gone."
yeah, yeah. Huge, huge, huge event. And I know that that's sort of slipping into history right now, but that was a huge, huge event. Yeah.
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 And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a part of that, you know, surviving a pandemic and all of those kinds of things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's many of those things that happened to us, that 9/11, we all, and the, the unfortunate part about there's many unfortunate things about that, but the solidarity that we have after those events we fritter away. We fritter away back into, I mean, when Kennedy's assassinated, everyone comes together. After 9/11, everyone comes together. When the pandemic first begins, everyone comes together as much as they can at that point, to look out for your kids, look out for your neighbors and that type of thing. And we kind of fritter that away afterwards. We forget that feeling. It's
You know,
unfortunate.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, before we got on, you had asked about my radio show, my jazz
Yeah,
show,
yeah.
and I kind of keep them separated and they intersect every once in a while. But I think right now is the appropriate time to bring it in. One of the reasons why I'm doing famous interviews is because jazz has been such a seminal world for me. When I started my show, I went in saying I'm not going to read about jazz. I'm going to get the story from the practitioners, from the musicians. It's their story. It's a uniquely American tale. It needs to be told by the musicians. And what I discovered over time is how wondrous this jazz community is. It is a group of people, of all the people that I've been around. I've worked retail, I've worked corporate, I've worked all of these things. I've traveled, I've seen things, probably not as much as I could have, but I've seen enough. The jazz human beings on this planet are a very special group of humans. What was that like to live and swim through that world and be a part of that community?
Uh, well, it was again sort of one of those transcendent experiences. First of all, I met some incredible players. I mean, people who could just, burn your eyelids off with their technique. I think my biggest takeaway from this is that it's such a language that you can walk into a room with three people you've never met before. Say I play piano, so say I walk into a room with um, uh, a drummer, a bass player and a horn player, say a sax or a trumpet player. We could never have met before. We've never even seen each other before. We could sit down and play Stella by Starlight. We could sit down and play, all the things you are. Take any of the standards, any of the things that Miles did or Bill Evans or people like that. And we could communicate almost telepathically because we've probably listened to a good deal of the same music. We've probably listened to, um, uh, many variations of that tune before, and we bring that into that situation, and it's magic. It's probably the only situation I can think of where you could walk into a room w with people you don't know and still produce something.
Yep.
It's so that would be my, um, and I love it to this day.
Yep.
It's just great.
It's
Yeah.
magic. So, who's your hero? Who's been your hero in your life to do all of this?
You mean musical hero?
Or just in general, just somebody that's been an inspirational force for you to be all of these things that you've evolved into.
I'd say that probably my biggest hero. We're going to take a wildly. Oh no, actually, he was into jazz. I forgot about this. Thomas Merton. Have you
Yeah.
heard that?
Uh-huh.
Okay,
Yep.
Thomas Merton. Uh, to me is the my go-to guy for spirituality, and he loved jazz. He was really into jazz, and he he was always restless, and I really appreciate that. But because I've always, I've never taken yes for an answer. It's like, you just gotta. And so I really appreciate the fact that he tried to straddle that bridge between silence and being out in the world, between silence and music, between, just and he wrestled with it to the very end. Even his Christianity, he was wrestling with to the very end. And I think, to me, that is such an admirable characteristic to maintain that tension through the course of a lifetime. Although he died quite young, but he uh, to be able to maintain that sense of wonder and sense of innocence, and yet never get there,
Yeah.
and know you'll never get there. I think is just a profoundly. I even made a pilgrimage to the abbey that he was in, just to see where his grave was,
Wow.
down in Kentucky, and just which is a long way from Massachusetts. I can tell
Yes,
you
it
that.
certainly is. Certainly is. So, if you could get into a time machine when we get off this call, load up and go and see one jazz show in the history of this wonderful art form, where are you going?
I would probably go to. Let's see. I'd probably go to 1964, and this is ironic because this would have been just a few days before the Beatles hit. It would have been Miles' show at Carnegie Hall,
Wow.
or the Philharmonic,
Okay.
when he was playing with Ray Brown was on bass, Ron Carter was on bass. I can't remember all the musicians, but Miles was at his. Miles and Bill Evans had a where I mean they came out with Kind of Blue, which
Yeah.
is like the seminal jazz album. But Miles playing My Funny Valentine at the beginning of that, to me is just like, whoa, this guy, he did some strange things in his life, but he also did some incredibly beautiful things. And yeah, so I would go back to, if I could have been sitting in that audience. I think that, and then taking a trip down the street a couple of days later, just in the Ed Sullivan thing, would have been the best weekend of my entire life.
Absolutely. That would be wonderful, man.
Yeah.
So, what gets you up every day? What motivates you to be positive, to create, to do all of these things to affect lives? What gets you up every day?
Well, I'm still writing. I had a book come out last year, or they came out last year, and I'm still very active. I'm still doing a lot of piano stuff. That's I have a fairly decent following on Spotify and Pandora, and so I I have the luxury, and I know that this is a luxury that a lot of people don't get to experience. I'm not rich, but I have enough money to support an average lifestyle. but I get to create every day. That's what I get to do. And, make stuff up, to me, that's, I feel incredibly blessed to be able to do that. So that's what gets me out of bed.
So, of everything that you've done and evolved into, what are you the proudest of?
Um, Probably my kids.
Yeah, I dig it.
I think that uh, they certainly gave me a run for their money when they were teenagers. Um, uh, and But they turned into just good people.
Yeah,
They're not like they're famous people or anything, but they have good little families that and they're raising each one is raising a great granddaughter. They're tied in, we see them a lot. They're tied in with their families. And being a pastor, you can see how many times that does not happen. You see how many times people's lives go sideways because of their kids. The kids that things that their kids do. So, um, yeah, proud, but even more than proud, just grateful, just really grateful because there's just so many ways that can go wrong. And
absolutely.
when going to be visiting my daughter this weekend, and it's like, okay, it doesn't get much better than this. This
Yep,
is,
that's the way to
uh,
do it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, talk about the latest book.
So the book is called "Honest to God," and what it does is it does two braids. It traces my exit from the music business up to going into seminary, and then it traces my last year of in another braid of leaving a church and ending up with the idea that I really don't know anything at all. And by that I mean, the Christian. Um, uh, I have no beef with Christianity at all. I think but I come down with we have so many rules, so many different ways of doing things. You know, if in fact there is the God that we imagine there is, does that God need to hear yet another version of how great thou art? I really don't think so. I think that we can be out in the street. I think that we do our best work out the back door.
Yeah,
Taking care of people who are hungry, taking care of people who are mentally challenged, people who have a tough time in life. And I think that um, just became less and less sure, but more and more, I hope, compassionate and grateful.
yeah. So, at the end of the day, John, everyone has a perception of you. Family, friends, everybody that knows you in your different creative capacities and as a pastor, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Well, I'm going to put some hopes in there. Hope that I'm a good friend. I like to. Made a. I heard you did a podcast that you did just yesterday with a woman talking about how news is dividing us apart, which I absolutely completely agree with. That the taking over clickbaits or the move to clickbait is just a horrible thing.
Yeah.
I've been making a phone call a day just to a friend, just to make sure that those ties are still there. So I hope that they think that I'm a loyal friend, that I'm a good dad, a good granddad, and that if they get a chuckle out of something that I write, or if it makes them think a little bit, then that would make my day. That would make my day.
So, if
Yeah.
anyone wants to listen to your music, get your books, delve into anything and everything that's a part of your world, where do they go?
Uh, Book is on it's on Spotify. Though. Yeah, that would be strange. The book is on Amazon. It's called Honest to God. You can find me on Spotify. Just go to Spotify, search for John Hamilton. There's a bunch of us. I'm not a multiple personality, but there's a bunch of John Hamiltons. Look for the one who does um, uh, Beatles covers and piano music and piano jazz.
Okay. This has been great, John. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You ask such great questions. I mean, questions that, I mean, this has been jazz. This has been jazz, what we've done here.
Yeah,
You've been throwing me, you've been taking 16, I've been taking 16. It's great to do this, Joe.
we're
Yeah.
riffing. That's what we're doing. So I want. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.